It was late, nearly midnight, when I heard it. A faint noise coming from the basement. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling in, or maybe the furnace was kicking on. But as I lay there, straining to hear the sound, I realized it was something else. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic. With a shiver, I threw on my robe, grabbed the small flashlight I kept by the bed, and crept down the hallway. I had a habit of being overly cautious, so I'd left the basement light on when I'd brought up some laundry earlier that evening. But as I got closer to the door, I noticed the light was off. My hand hovered over the doorknob, my heart thudding in my chest. Slowly, I twisted the knob and opened the door, the hinges creaking in protest. I shone my flashlight down the stairs, illuminating the narrow, unfinished steps leading into my basement. The scraping sound had stopped, but there was something else now, a quiet, raspy breathing. My mouth went dry as I took a cautious step forward, trying to stay silent. I didn't want to think about what or who could be down there. My flashlight swept over the room, illuminating old storage boxes, the water heater, and the washer and dryer, all exactly as I'd left them. And then I saw it. Huddled in the corner, just behind the water heater, was a figure, a man. His clothes were filthy and torn, his skin pale and gaunt. His eyes, wide and wild, caught the light of my flashlight and reflected it back in a way that sent a cold shiver down my spine. For a second, he just stared at me, neither of us moving, both frozen. Then he started to stand, his movements slow and jerky, like he hadn't moved in hours. A low growl escaped from his lips, the sound of it primal, animalistic. I backed up, my feet fumbling over the stairs, but I kept my eyes locked on him. His head tilted to the side, and a slow, eerie grin spread across his face. "You're not supposed to be here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered down the stairs, plunging the room into darkness. I bolted back up, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in and out. For a long time, I just stood there, listening for any sound from the basement, but there was only silence. I called the police, and when they arrived, they searched the basement from top to bottom, but they found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no trace of anyone being there. They told me it was probably just my imagination, that the noises I'd heard were probably pipes or old boards settling. But as I lay awake that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still down there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to come back. I'd lived in that house for over a year before I found it. It started with a leak in the basement wall. I'd gone down there to check on it, planning to patch it up myself, when I noticed something strange. There was a faint outline on the far wall, almost like a door frame hidden beneath the plaster. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started chipping away at the plaster, careful not to damage anything. After about 20 minutes, a small, narrow door emerged. It was a hidden closet. I stood back, staring at it. It looked older than the rest of the house, as if it had been sealed off decades ago. A tiny keyhole sat just above the rusted knob, but there was no key in sight. I hesitated, but eventually I grabbed a screwdriver and pried the door open. The hinges groaned, and a stale, musty smell wafted out, making me cover my nose. Inside, the closet was pitch dark. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it inside. It was a small space, barely large enough for one person to stand in. The walls were lined with faded, peeling wallpaper. and on the floor was an old moth-eaten blanket, crumpled in a heap. But what caught my eyes was what laid on top of it. A dusty, leather-bound journal. I reached in, my hand trembling, and I picked it up. The journal's cover was cracked and brittle, but when I opened it, the pages were filled with spidery handwriting, almost illegible from age. As I skimmed through it, a chill ran down my spine. The entries were dated from the early 1900s, and each page was filled with descriptions of someone hiding. The writer spoke about feeling watched, hearing footsteps in the night, and being forced into the closet whenever they came around. But as I flipped further, the entries grew more frantic, more desperate. "I don't think I'll make it," one line read. "They know where I am now. I can hear them outside, whispering," another line read. My hand started to shake, but I kept reading, drawn in by some morbid fascination. The last entry was short. "If anyone finds this, please do not open the door." I felt the hair on my arm stand up, and for the first time, I noticed something odd about the closet's inside wall. There was a tiny, scratched indentation, like someone had clawed at it in desperation. A faint, rhythmic tap echoed in the back of my mind, as if I could almost hear the nails scraping at the wood, pleading to be let out. With trembling hands, I put the journal back and shut the door as fast as I could. I backed away, my mind racing. Was it just an old story? A cruel joke someone had left behind? That same night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to every creak and groan of my house. Just past midnight, I thought I heard it. The faint sound of tapping, coming from the basement. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and I was cleaning out the basement, determined to finally get rid of all the junk that had piled up over the years. I was shifting old boxes, stirring up clouds of dust, when I saw a faint stain on the floor in the far corner. It was dark, reddish brown, and trailed along the concrete, disappearing behind an old bookshelf. Curious and a little uneasy, I pulled the bookshelf away from the wall. The stain continued, a winding smear leading to a small hidden door in the foundation wall. I'd never noticed it before, though I'd spent plenty of time down here. The door was low, almost like a crawlspace entrance, and there was no handle, just a rusted latch. I hesitated, but found myself crouching down and flicking the latch open. The door groaned as it swung inward, revealing a narrow, pitch-black space. I shined my flashlight into the opening, expecting to see a small storage nook or maybe some old piping. But instead, the light hit what looked like fabric. I leaned in, bringing the flashlight closer, and then I saw it. A crumpled mass of clothing, and what looked like a mannequin lying in the small crawl space. It was twisted, its limbs bent at odd angles. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief, thinking it was just some forgotten Halloween decoration. But as I looked closer, I noticed the clothing was modern, worn-looking, and stained with the same dark red as the trail left on the floor. A feeling of dread washed over me as I realized the mannequin wasn't plastic. It was something else. Something real. My hand started shaking as I shined the light over the figure's face. It was gaunt, pale and lifeless, with hollow eyes staring blankly into the darkness. The mouth was slightly open, frozen in an expression that almost looked pleading. I backed away, a cold sweat prickling my skin, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Whoever they were, they'd been down here a long time, and whoever had left them here had gone to great lengths to keep them hidden. I stumbled back, my mind racing, heart pounding as I ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. I called the police, unable to even explain properly what I just found. They came down, went towards my basement, and soon enough, they found the hidden door and what laid behind it. When they came back up, their faces were pale, grim. Later on, they told me they'd identified the remains. It was someone who had disappeared from the neighborhood years ago. No leads, no evidence, until now. One of the detectives looked at me in the eye and said, "Whoever did this probably knew your house well." That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in my home, watching, planning, and leaving dark secrets behind. I haven't been down to the basement since.